progressives who may need their Ritalin refilled, and gentlemen. What we're going to talk about now, this is a follow-up to my video response to Old Brown Teeth on Cliven Bundy. And I'll leave the link below. You can read all this. I'm not going to read it all off. But it deals with federal government ownership of land and specifically repealing the Antiquities Act. Now, Cliven Bundy's land wasn't under the auspices of the Antiquities Act because that was grazing land. The Antiquities Act deals with monuments, which is far more difficult to deal with as far as a state. Grazing land, that the BLM owns is a little easier. But as Cliven Bundy found out, and he ended up winning, as Cliven Bundy found out, it can still be really difficult. But I think what we need to do is, and you need to write your senators and your House member on this as well. We need to devolve this land back to the states. Now, there's a lot of progressives, I remember the idiots over at Secular Talk and Stan Cedar. He's that guy that's a big fan of Roman Polanski, and little Davy Packrat, who the pimply-faced retarded tween who got on mommy's laptop and got himself a YouTube channel. They were just going into hysterics over this before the dust even settled. The smoke was still rolling out. And, they thought using Bundy's a racist, which even if he is a flaming racist, doesn't mean, what if the people that O.J. Simpson was accused of killing, what if they were found to be racist? Would that mean something? No, they just use, it's bad logic. Well, they always say, land, it belongs to the people. And when they say it belongs to the people, what they mean is the government's going to basically, especially if it's a monument, they're going to lock it up. And they'll take this, they're going to tell the states, well, this is what you can and can't do. The main point of this is the Antiquities Act is unconstitutional. This gives the executive branch way too much power, and you can thank Teddy Roosevelt, one of the worst presidents in the history of the United States, for that. So Bundy won, and now what we need to do is review the Antiquities Act. Donald Trump, as we'll get to, has taken a step in that direction because this gives the executive way too much power. So we need to return this land to the states. They will be better stewards of the land. I mean, look at all the things Washington does, involving all 50 states and how it's turned into a train wreck. Utah could deal with all that land, and they could be better stewards of the land than a bunch of perverts in Washington. So working at BLM or whatever. So here's my little spiel as part of that. The federal government owns 640 million acres of land, mainly in the West, which is 28% of the land in the United States. For more than a century after the nation's founding, the federal government aimed to sell or give away Western lands to individuals, but that changed. Just like for the longest time, the federal government wasn't the be-all, end-all of everything. And now we've got people like Stan Cedar out there autistically repeating that we need more socialism, but the socialism we're having now isn't real socialism. Real socialism's coming later. But for more than a century after the nation's founding, and most of them don't know this, they'll be like, oh, I thought the federal government was always taking land. No, not really. No, learn some history. Learn Stan Cedar, if you're listening, learn some history, buddy. The federal government aimed to sell or give away Western lands to individuals, businesses, and state governments. But by the turn of the 20th century, federal policy came under the sway of progressives, mainly the 1906 Antiquities Act, who favored increased federal control. Progressives had a misguided notion that federal ownership would be efficient and environmentally sound. Broadly speaking, they were wrong. But they've got internet talking points that say different. Experience has shown that federal agencies mismanage land from both economic and environmental perspectives, as discussed here, and here that's in the links. The solution is to devolve ownership of most federal land to the states and private sector. The Bureau of Land Management owns about 250 million acres of land, of which about 160 million acres are used for livestock grazing. That could easily be turned over to the states right now, and it should be. The Bureau of Land Management is a bloated agency, and they could get rid of a lot of people and save taxpayers a lot of money and save people like Clive and Bundy a lot of headaches. The Antiquities Act was a response to concerns over theft and destruction of archaeological sites, and was designed to provide an expeditious means to protect federal lands and resources. Keep listening. President Theodore Roosevelt used the authority in the 1906 Antiquities Act to establish Devil's Tower in Wyoming as the first national monument. I've been there. It's actually pretty neat. 16 of the 19 presidents since 1906 created 151 monuments, including the Grand Canyon, Grand Teton, Zion Olympic, the Statue of Liberty, and the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. FDR uses authority the most often, 36 times, while President Oboingo has proclaimed the most monument acreage, about 549 million, primarily in 2 expanded marine monuments. Monuments vary widely in size, while roughly half of the presidential monument proclamations involve fewer than 5,000 acres. They have ranged from less than 1 acre to about 283 million acres. The federal government privatized 792 million acres of land between 1781 and 1940, and it transferred 470 million acres of land to the states. So again, a lot of our problems in America can be traced back to FDR. Theodore Roosevelt and his Congress opened the door for this. This is Congress outsourcing its duties. If a monument is to be declared, Congress should be in the loop, but they're not. And many times Congress is more than happy to tell the executive, yeah, we'll just let you do this, like they did with the War Powers Act. And the huge abuses under this act began under FDR. What is done by executive power can be undone by executive power. Former President Barry Oboingo began to learn that lesson when President Donald Trump signed an executive order directing Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke to conduct a review of all Antiquities Act designations larger than 100,000 acres over the past 30 years. Specifically, the executive order directs Zinke to consider the requirements and original objectives of the act, which if you read through the act, they're not the original objectives of it, even though it is unconstitutional. They're not adhering to that, so they can't follow their own rules. Zinke is to consider the requirements and original objectives of the act, including the act's requirement that reservations of land not exceed the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected. And again, this whole thing about raiding antiquity sites and destroying stuff, that was already illegal. What do you think if you make it a monument? Oh boy, like they make a law about guns. Well, I bet if we take away everybody's guns, there'll be no guns out there. And I bet if we declare this place a monument, the act of going in and destroying antiquities that was already illegal, it's really illegal now, and it'll stop them. So it not very good logic. You know, these are the people we've chosen to lead for us back then and now, and these people they're not too bright. But then again, I think the voters are asleep at the wheel. Designated lands that are appropriately classified under the Act as historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, or other objects of historic or scientific interest. Again, go read the Act. I've got it linked to. Read the whole thing for yourself. They don't even adhere to their own rules. This wording strongly suggests that Hussein Oboingo's lame duck decision to designate 1.35 million acres in San Juan County as a national monument will at least be significantly reduced and possibly entirely rescinded. And that's sound the alarm. It's anarchy. Some environmental whack jobs may claim that Trump does not have the power to shrink or revoke Obama's Antiquities Act designations, but these claims are ignorant of both history and law. And if you get your info from Secular Talk, Stan Cedar, that Roman Polanski supporter, or Little Davy Packrat, you probably won't know this. Maybe they'll look it up now. For starters, as University of California, Berkeley Law School Professor John Yoo and Pacific Legal Foundation Executive Director Todd Gaziano detailed in a recent legal report, 5 presidents have significantly reduced 4 previous monument designations, and no one has ever questioned the legality of those reductions. The Center for American Progress had quite a hissy fit over Trump's executive order. Someone get their Ritalin refilled. Thanks. Specifically, Eisenhower reduced the Great Sand Dunes National Monument by 25%. President Harry Truman reduced the Santa Rosa Island National Monument by 49%. We should impeach Truman posthumously. Presidents Taft, Woodrow, Segregation Wilson. That's what I was looking for. Woodrow Segregation Wilson and Calvin Coolidge, probably my favorite president from the 20th century on, collectively reduced the Mount Olympus Monument by 49%, and Taft reduced the Navajo National Monument by 89%. So we should impeach all of them. And lastly, this little tidbit. It's funny how progressives, a president can just decree by fiat something, but if another president decrees by fiat that that's null and void, they have an autistic fit. This is the last part. Since 1990, total federal lands have generally declined. Many disposals of areas of federal lands have occurred. At the same time, the federal government has acquired many parcels of land, and there have been various new federal land designations, including wilderness areas and national park units. Through the numerous individual acquisitions and disposals since 1990, the total federal land ownership has declined by 25.4 million acres, or 3.9% of the total of the 5 agencies. The total acreage decline reflects decreased acreage for 2 agencies, but increased acreage for 3 others. Specifically, BLM ownership decreased by 23.7 million acres, or 8.7%. And BLM, all that grazing land, 160 million acres of it should be given to the states now, and we could almost shut BLM down. We could, a lot of these career employees who, these decades-long paper pushers, could go find something else to do. Department of Defense lands declined by 9.1 million acres, so the Department of Defense is not the big problem. Their lands declined by 9.1 million acres, or 44.5%. In contrast, the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Forestry Service expanded their acreage during the period, with the National Park Service having the largest increase in both acreage and percentage growth, 3.6 million acres, or 4.8%. In some cases, a decrease in one agency's acreage was tied to an increase in acreage owned by another agency. And as you can see, if you're dealing with the BLM, you're going to be dealing with some thugs, but as they found out, sometimes the people push back. A reduction in federal lands in Alaska was a major reason for the total decline. Get that? A reduction in federal lands in Alaska was a major reason for the total decline in federal lands since 1990. Federal land declined in Alaska by 21.5 million acres, or 8.8%, between 1990 and 2015. This decline in Alaska is largely the result of the disposal of BLM land under law to the state of Alaska. Alaska Natives and Alaska Native Corporations. Federal land has also decreased in the 11 contiguous western states by 6.6 million acres, or 1.9%. Reflected in this overall decline are reductions for 4 of the 11 states, with decreases of 6.3 million acres in Arizona, 4.1 million acres in Nevada, and smaller decreases in Utah and California. 7 of the 11 states had varying increases, with the largest being 2.8 million acres in New Mexico. Outside Alaska and the other western states, federal land increased by 2.8 million acres, or 6.1%. BLM and FS are far and away the largest holders of land. Forestry Service, far and away the largest holders of land within these United States at 70.9% of the entire total of all land held by Washington. Those 2 agencies alone account for more than 54.1% of all federal land in Alaska and the 11 western states. So as you know, if you've kept up with this, out west, the federal government owns a lot of land, and there's 160 million acres of grazing land which should be returned to the states immediately, and then we can work from there. So squeaky wheel gets the grease. Write your senators, write your member of the House. Let's get it done. Let's push back against these fascists like Stan Cedar, Secular Talk, and Little Davy Packrat, and as my Clive and Bunny video was on Old Fart Rants, who is also an authoritarian and a huge hypocrite. We need to push back at these people. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Have a nice day. And don't thank me now for the info.